I never thought I'd be here spilling all this out for strangers to read, but I guess that's how things go. Life has a way of throwing shit at you. And before you know it, you're writing on Reddit about how you just had sex with your wife's best friend. Yeah, I said it. I slept with Sarah. And no, it's not what you're thinking. It's not some random affair or sudden moment of passion. It's calculated, cold, and part of a much bigger story. One that starts with my wife, Laura, and my brother, Tim. You're probably already thinking you know where this is going, right? Wife cheated, guy's pissed. But it's more than that. It's who she cheated with that twisted the knife even deeper. My own fucking brother. Tim, the golden child, the one who always had it easy. You can't make this shit up, and trust me, I wish I could. I guess I should start from the beginning, back when everything looked perfect. I mean, on paper, I had it all. A beautiful wife, a decent job, and what seemed like a solid family. I'm not saying we were millionaires or anything, but my parents ran a small family business, and it did well enough. They always hinted they'd pass it down to us one day. You boys will run this place someday, they'd say. Yeah, about that. I don't know when it started, but there was always this unspoken favoritism in my family. Tim was younger, more charismatic, the one who could do no wrong. I always felt like I had to fight for every scrap of attention, every ounce of approval. If Tim showed up with a half-assed idea, they'd praise him for his ambition, but when I worked my ass off, it was just expected. It was always like that growing up. He got the better Christmas presents, more freedom, and fewer rules. Hell, even when he screwed up, they'd brush it off like it was no big deal. Boys will be boys, my dad would say, as if that excused every shitty thing Tim ever did. And then came the business talk. My parents sitting me down, all serious, like they were about to drop some kind of bombshell. Jake, we've been thinking, Tim's got a knack for this. We want to hand the business to him soon. Just like that. Not even a discussion. Just a fucking statement. I remember sitting there, feeling my stomach drop, like everything I'd worked for meant nothing. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Tim was their guy, but I stayed quiet. What else could I do? I wasn't going to raise hell about it, at least not then. I had Laura, and I figured we'd make our own life, our own success. I didn't need the family business, I told myself. We'd figure it out together. But then Laura started changing. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I mean, we were good, or at least I thought we were. Sure, we had the usual fights. Every couple does, right? But then she started acting different, distant. She'd disappear for hours, saying she was just out with friends or needed some time. When I'd ask about it, she'd brush me off, get defensive like I was the one in the wrong for even questioning her. And I, like an idiot, let it slide. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think everything was okay, that it was just a phase or some rough patch we were going through. Then came the lies. Little things that didn't add up. Missed calls, strange excuses, random nights out where she wouldn't even bother to check in. And still, I wanted to believe her. That's the fucked up part, isn't it? When you love someone, you'll do anything to avoid facing the truth. It wasn't until I talked to one of my buddies that I realized I needed to know. Really know. Brian, he's been my best friend since we were kids, suggested something that felt crazy at the time. Hidden cameras. You gotta protect yourself, man, he said. And that's when it hit me. What if she really was cheating? What if everything I suspected was true, and I was just too blind to see it? So, yeah, I did it. I installed hidden cameras in our home. I told myself it was just to ease my mind, that I'd catch her lying about going out with friends or something innocent. I didn't expect what I found. The first time I watched the footage, I felt like I was watching someone else's life. If she was in our house with Tim, my fucking brother. It wasn't just a quick fling either. It was intense, passionate, like she'd been with him 100 times before. They laughed together, whispered shit to each other, like I didn't even exist. It was like watching a bad movie, except I was the one getting screwed. At that moment, something inside me broke. I can't even describe the feeling. Betrayal doesn't cover it. Anger? Sure, but it was deeper than that. It was humiliation. My own wife in my house with my brother. My blood. I wanted to explode. I wanted to throw it in their faces, confront them, beat the shit out of Tim, and scream at Laura until my throat was raw. But I didn't. No, I did something worse. I kept quiet. I let them think they'd gotten away with it. And that's when I started planning my revenge. After watching the footage, it's like something inside me snapped. I sat there for hours just staring at the screen, watching it over and over again. Every time I replayed it, the anger grew until I couldn't breathe. You hear about this kind of betrayal, but when it happens to you, when it's your wife, your brother, it feels like you're drowning and no one's throwing a rope. Humiliation hit first. Knowing they had been sneaking around behind my back, using our home as their playground, like I didn't matter, like I was some fucking joke. I kept thinking how long, how many times. I wanted to smash everything, burn the house down, erase every trace of what I saw. But that wouldn't be enough. I knew I needed more than just an emotional outburst. I needed revenge. Cold, calculated revenge. If I acted too soon, I'd lose my chance to destroy them both. So, I waited. I let the rage fester. Let it grow until it consumed me. But I wasn't going to do something reckless. I had to hit them where it hurt most, and that meant planning this right. I couldn't just confront them. That's what they'd expect. No, I had to do something that would make them regret ever crossing me. That's when the idea of Sarah came to mind. Sarah, Laura's best friend. They'd been inseparable since college. If there was anyone Laura confided in, it was her. And that's why I knew using Sarah would cut even deeper. It wasn't just about getting back at Laura. It was about twisting the knife in every possible way. I started small, a few texts here and there, casual, friendly. I'd mention Laura, maybe some complaints, things to open the door. Sarah's sharp. She knew something was off between Laura and me before I even reached out, but she didn't pry, at least not at first. Women always know when something's wrong. Soon enough, I started laying it on thicker. Compliments, flirting, and a bit of subtle charm. The thing about Sarah is she's not oblivious. She liked the attention, especially since her relationship with her boyfriend had been rocky for months. Laura knew all about it, constantly giving her advice that she clearly didn't take. It didn't take long before Sarah started biting on my bait. But I wasn't in a hurry. This was a process. I wasn't just going to jump into bed with her. I needed to make her feel like it was natural, like it was meant to happen. That's the trick with revenge. You don't rush it. You let it unfold. Meanwhile, I started thinking about the footage. I couldn't get the image of Laura and Tim out of my head, and I realized that just exposing them to me wouldn't be enough. They'd need to suffer publicly. I wanted the world to see what kind of people they were. It wasn't about shame. It was about stripping away everything they valued. If I leaked the video online, anonymously of course, there'd be no coming back from that. Tim's reputation would be destroyed. Laura, well, people have a way of forgetting men's mistakes, but women? Not so much. I started looking into how to make it happen. Forums, articles, discussions about leaking stuff without it being traced back to you. It was dangerous, but if I did it right, they'd never know it was me. They'd just think it was some kind of hack or random leak. Maybe they'd blame each other. Who knows? At this point, I knew I needed to start covering my bases legally. Laura didn't know anything about what was coming, and that gave me the upper hand. I contacted a lawyer. I didn't give too much away, just that I was considering a divorce and wanted to protect my assets. I told him I suspected infidelity, and he nodded like he'd heard it 1,000,000 times before. I want to freeze our accounts, I said. I don't want her touching a single dollar when this goes down. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. We can make that happen, but it'll take some time. You'll need to provide proof of the infidelity, and it can't just be hearsay. Proof? Oh, I had that in spades. I'll get you what you need. We went over some other details, like how to protect my personal assets and keep Laura from accessing our joint savings. I didn't want her to see this coming, and the lawyer was smart enough to know how to handle it. The hardest part? Keeping it all to myself. I had to act normal. Pretend like everything was fine, like I wasn't already miles ahead of her. Every time I looked at her, though, I felt sick. She'd smile at me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't been fucking my brother behind my back. And I'd smile right back, all while planning how to tear her world apart. Sarah, meanwhile, was warming up to me quickly. I'd catch her throwing glances at me when Laura wasn't looking. It was only a matter of time before I made my move. But I wasn't just going to sleep with her to get even. I needed to make sure Laura knew. She needed to feel the betrayal, just like I did. I could feel it all starting to come together. The pieces were falling into place. And soon enough, the fallout was going to be glorious. The first part of revenge is about patience. You have to lay the groundwork, make the person feel comfortable, make them think it's their idea. And that's exactly what I needed to do with Laura. I couldn't just come at her, guns blazing, accusing her of sleeping with Tim, because she'd either deny it or worse, get defensive and push me further away. No, I had to play this smart. One evening after dinner, I casually brought it up. We were sitting on the couch, and I acted distant, like I had something on my mind. Laura, being Laura, didn't really care at first. She was busy on her phone, probably texting Tim or Sarah, but that didn't matter. I had to make her listen. So, I've been thinking, I said, leaning back, making sure my tone was as calm as possible. About us. About relationships in general. She looked up from her phone, curious but clearly not too concerned. What do you mean? I hesitated for effect, like I wasn't sure how to bring it up. You know, it's complicated being married, right? I mean, people change. Needs change. I've been reading stuff online about how some couples manage to keep things fresh by, being more open. Her reaction was immediate. A mix of confusion and suspicion. What are you talking about? Open? Like an open marriage? I gave a casual shrug, as if I hadn't been waiting for this moment. Not exactly that, but yeah, kinda. I mean, people have different ways of keeping things exciting. I just think maybe it's worth talking about. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh. It was that awkward, nervous one she does when she doesn't know how to respond. Are you serious right now? Look, I'm not saying we should jump into anything. I just think it's something couples go through, especially after being together for a while. People get bored, They start looking elsewhere, whether they admit it or not. Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, I thought she'd call me out. But I kept my cool, giving her just enough space to think it through. It was the perfect setup. Make her think I was considering other options so she wouldn't suspect I already knew she was fucking my brother. She didn't even know she was being played. Not yet. I don't know, Jake. That sounds crazy. I mean, I've never thought about something like that, she said, shaking her head, but there was hesitation in her voice. Exactly what I was looking for. I get it, I said, backing off a little. It's not for everyone. But, hey, we're grown-ups, right? We should be able to talk about things like this without freaking out. Just a conversation. And that's how I left it. I didn't push any further that night, but the seed was planted. I knew it would start eating at her, gnawing at the back of her mind. She was already cheating on me, so the idea of an open relationship wasn't entirely foreign to her. I just had to make it sound like I was okay with it, like I was opening the door. It didn't take long before she brought it up again. A few days later, out of nowhere, she casually mentioned Sarah. I was talking to Sarah earlier, about that thing you said. What thing? I asked, acting clueless, knowing exactly where this was going. The open relationship thing. She thought it was kind of interesting, like a lot of couples are doing it these days, apparently. Bingo! I knew Laura wouldn't be able to resist talking to Sarah about it. Sarah, who I had been slowly working on in the background, was already falling into place. She didn't even know it yet, but I was playing both of them. Oh, did she? I said, pretending to be surprised. What did she say? Laura shrugged, but I could tell she was curious, maybe even a little intrigued. She didn't seem freaked out by the idea. I don't know, she said some couples do it, and it works for them. I let out a low laugh. Well, I guess people are more open-minded than we thought. The game was on. Laura didn't even realize that by talking to Sarah, she was giving me exactly what I needed. Sarah was now involved, even if she didn't know the full extent of it yet. Over the next couple of weeks, things between Sarah and me escalated. I started texting her more, throwing in compliments and flirty banter whenever Laura wasn't around. She ate it up. Sarah was always the kind of person who loved attention, and with her relationship on the rocks, I was her distraction. We started meeting up for coffee, under the guise of talking things through, or catching up. Laura didn't think anything of it, because in her mind, Sarah was loyal to her. She didn't know that Sarah had her own desires, and I was just fueling the fire. Eventually, I brought up the whole open relationship thing with Sarah. I made it sound like Laura was all in on it, even though she hadn't fully agreed. You know, Laura and I have been talking about trying new things, being more open, I said one evening when Sarah and I were alone. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of hesitation, but instead, she seemed intrigued. "Oh, really?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, I mean, it's all new to us, but it feels like something worth exploring. Laura doesn't seem to mind, and I think it could be interesting." That was all Sarah needed to hear. She saw it as permission, a green light to take things further. We kept it light at first, harmless flirting, a few touches here and there. But each time, the tension between us grew thicker, like we were inching towards something inevitable. I could feel it happening, the slow burn of anticipation. And the best part? Laura had no idea. She didn't know I was already weaving her best friend into the web of revenge I was spinning. It finally happened. After weeks of playing this careful, calculated game, I finally crossed the line with Sarah. The moment came on a Saturday night when Laura was out, probably with Tim, pretending like she had some girls' night or whatever bullshit excuse she'd come up with that time. I didn't care. I had my own plans. Sarah came over, supposedly for a drink and to talk. But we both knew what was really going to happen. The air was thick with tension the moment she walked through the door. She knew it. I knew it. We didn't even have to say it. It was just a matter of time before one of us made the first move. We sat on the couch, sipping wine, and I kept the conversation light, just flirting, touching her arm every now and then. I could see the way she looked at me, like she'd been waiting for this. She was practically leaning into me, waiting for me to make the next move. And when I did, it felt like everything had finally come full circle. I leaned in, brushing her hair back, letting my fingers trail down her neck. She didn't pull away, didn't even hesitate. Her lips parted slightly, and that was all the invitation I needed. Our mouths met, and it was all heat from there. I kissed her hard, pushing her back onto the couch, my hands exploring her body while she let out these soft moans, completely giving in. The thrill of it wasn't just about Sarah, it was about what this meant for my plan. Every kiss, every touch was a step closer to the revenge I'd been working toward. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We didn't need to. Clothes came off, and before I knew it, we were tangled up on the couch, the wine glass tipping over, but neither of us cared. It wasn't about the sex itself. It was about the power, the control. Knowing I was taking something that belonged to Laura, something she never would have seen coming. And Sarah? She had no idea she was just a pawn in this game. She thought this was real, something meaningful. But to me, it was just a move in a much larger play. Afterward, as Sarah lay next to me, catching her breath, I felt this wave of triumph wash over me. I didn't even care about Sarah at that moment. I was thinking about Laura, about how this would absolutely destroy her. The idea that her best friend and her husband had just slept together, behind her back, and she had no clue, it was perfect. And the best part? Laura had basically given me permission by entertaining the whole open relationship idea. She thought she was in control. She thought she had me fooled. I let Sarah sleep for a while, my mind already turning to the next phase of my plan. The sex with Sarah was just one part. Now came the real damage. The footage. I'd been sitting on it for weeks, just waiting for the right moment. The video of Laura and Tim screwing in our bed was like a ticking time bomb, and it was time to set it off. I'd already done my research. How to leak it anonymously, how to make sure it couldn't be traced back to me. It was surprisingly easy. People leak shit online all the time. It's almost impossible to find out who did it unless you're careless. And I wasn't about to be careless. I uploaded the video to a few key websites, made sure to post it in places where it would spread quickly. I didn't add any names, didn't give any identifying details. Just the footage of them going at it like they didn't have a care in the world. I knew it would go viral. It was only a matter of time before people started sharing it, commenting, tearing them apart. As I hit submit on the last site, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to feel. Maybe relief? Maybe satisfaction? Instead, it was this weird mix of anticipation and anger, like I was waiting for the storm to hit. I knew what was coming. Once that video made its rounds, there was no going back. Tim and Laura would be humiliated. Their reputations? Shattered. They'd never recover from this. And that's what I wanted. The next few days were a blur. I waited for the fallout, kept checking the sites, watching as the video gained traction. The comments started rolling in, people calling out Laura and Tim for what they were: cheats, liars, scum. They didn't know their names, but they didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. At home, things were starting to change. Laura noticed. She wasn't dumb, at least not completely. She sensed a shift in my attitude, the way I stopped caring, the way I didn't get upset when she went out. I could see it in her eyes. She was getting nervous, like she couldn't figure out what had changed. She started asking questions, trying to figure out what was going on with me. "You've been acting weird lately," she said one night as we sat at dinner. "Is something wrong?" I played it off, gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just been busy with work." "Why? Is something wrong with you?" She blinked, confused. "No, I don't know, you seem different." I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just starting to see things differently." She didn't like that. I could tell it made her uneasy, but she didn't push. She was too focused on keeping her own secrets, too scared that I might catch on to what she was doing with Tim. But little did she know, I already knew everything. I was just waiting for the right moment to throw it all in her face. And Sarah? She was none the wiser. She thought what we had was some new, exciting secret. She didn't know she was just a piece of my revenge. It was all falling into place, and the best part was none of them saw it coming. It was time. I had waited long enough. The video had already done its damage, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Laura had no idea what was coming, and that's exactly how I wanted it. For weeks, I played the role of the distant husband, the guy who was too busy with work to notice her little secrets. She had no clue I was about to tear her life apart. One night after dinner, I sat her down. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and I could feel it in the air. Laura was on edge, sensing that something was off. She tried to keep things light, probably thinking she could smooth it over. But that ship had sailed a long time ago. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. She put down her fork, her brow furrowing with concern. "What's going on?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like a bomb, and I watched as her face twisted in confusion and shock. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't process what I just said. "What?" She finally managed, her voice shaky. "Where is this coming from?" "Jake, what are you talking about?" I almost laughed at how clueless she was. "Where is this coming from?" Like she hadn't been sneaking around with my brother for God knows how long. Like she hadn't been lying to my face every single day. "I'm done, Laura. This marriage, it's over." She shook her head, panic starting to creep into her eyes. No, this doesn't make any sense. We could talk about this, Jake." "What's wrong? Why are you saying this? We've had our rough patches, but we can fix it, right?" I shook my head, keeping my gaze steady. "There's nothing to fix. I'm done. I already talked to a lawyer." Her face went pale. "A lawyer? What the hell, Jake? Why didn't you talk to me first?" "Because there's nothing to talk about. You're not getting a second chance to fix this." I could see the desperation building in her eyes as she tried to scramble for an explanation, for anything that would make sense. But I didn't let her talk. I didn't let her spew her bullshit about how she didn't know or couldn't understand. "No, This wasn't going to be one of those drawn-out arguments where she pretends to care. I was in control. "I've already cut you off from our accounts," I said, watching her expression change in an instant. "You won't be able to touch the money. No credit cards, no savings. Everything's locked up, and I've frozen the assets. You're on your own from here on out." Her eyes widened, and her face twisted into a mix of fear and anger. "You did what?" "Jake, you can't just freeze the assets. I need access to our money. What am I supposed to do?" I shrugged, letting the weight of her panic settle over her. "That's your problem now. You've got nothing. No access to any of it." The realization hit her like a freight train. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like I had just morphed into someone she didn't know. But I had been this person all along. She just never bothered to look closely. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "This doesn't make any sense. We can fix this. Just talk to me. Let me—" I cut her off, leaning forward, my eyes locked onto hers. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about rough patches, Laura." "I know." Her face went white. "You know what?" I gave a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "I know about you and Tim. I've known for weeks. Don't even bother trying to deny it." Her mouth dropped open, her eyes widening in shock and horror. No, Jake, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "I've seen the footage." She froze. "What footage?" "The footage of you and Tim screwing in our bed," I said, watching as the color drained from her face. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you? But I did. And I've been watching you two for a while now. I know everything, Laura." She stared at me in stunned silence, her face contorting with a mix of disbelief and terror. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage this, but there was no way out. She was trapped, and she knew it. Jake," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Save it," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I've already filed for divorce, and I've made sure you won't get a single dime." She tried to speak, tried to form words, but nothing came out. She looked utterly defeated, broken. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the video, the lies, the betrayal. And any sympathy I might have felt disappeared. "And just so you know," I added, leaning back in my chair, "I wasn't just sitting around waiting for this to blow up in my face. I took matters into my own hands." Her tear-filled eyes flicked to me, confusion mixing with fear. "What are you talking about?" I let the silence hang for a moment, enjoying the suspense before delivering the final blow. "I fucked Sarah." Her face twisted in shock and disbelief. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. "Your best friend. I've been sleeping with her. And guess what? She thinks it's okay because you told her you were cool with open relationships." She gasped, covering her mouth with her hands as the reality of what I had just said sunk in. Her world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice cracking. I smiled, feeling the power shift entirely in my favor. "Maybe, but you made me this way." Laura sobbed, completely shattered. She had nothing left to say. The truth was out. Her betrayal was exposed. Her assets were frozen, and she'd lost everything. There was no redemption for her. Not anymore. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected. Once everything was out in the open, Laura barely had the energy to fight back. The footage had done its job, dragging her reputation through the mud. Tim tried to stay out of it, but his own world was falling apart. He lost his job, got booted from every family gathering, and our parents, finally seeing him for the entitled prick he really was, cut him off. As for Laura, she was a mess. The few times we met in court, she looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Tired, worn out, and completely broken. Good. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. She did this to herself. The divorce papers went through without a hitch, thanks to the lawyer I'd hired. I got what I wanted, control of our assets, the house, the car. Laura? She walked away with barely anything, and she knew she'd never see a cent from me again. But once the dust settled, I found myself alone in that big house. The place I used to call home, where we'd built a life together. It didn't feel like a victory, though. More like an end. I'd won, sure. I'd taken everything from her, and she was left with nothing. But as I stood there, looking around at the empty rooms, I realized something. Revenge had consumed me. It had been the driving force behind every decision, every action. And now I didn't know what was next. The truth was, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. There was no grand moment of closure, no feeling of triumph. Just silence. Laura was gone. The divorce was final, and I was free. But now what? I had no idea. I threw myself into work for a while, burying myself in projects and focusing on my career. It was the only thing that made sense at that point. Without the marriage to deal with, I had more time to put into my job, and I quickly started climbing the ranks. It felt good to be in control of something again. My boss took notice, giving me more responsibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like I was accomplishing something for myself. Not for Laura, not for us, just for me. As for Sarah, well, things with her didn't last. We kept in touch for a while after everything blew up. She'd text me, check in, and occasionally we'd meet up. But the excitement, the thrill that came with our affair started to fade. Now that my revenge was complete, there was no need to keep that connection going. The sex had been fun, sure, but that's all it ever was. I wasn't in love with Sarah. She was just another part of the plan. Eventually, the texts became fewer and farther between, until we just stopped talking altogether. She moved on, found someone new, and I didn't mind. It wasn't like we had a future together. I didn't need her anymore, and I certainly didn't want to drag her into whatever mess was left of my emotional state. Once the divorce was final, I had a lot of time to think about what came next. Starting over sounded easy enough, but it wasn't as simple as just flipping a switch and moving on. I had spent years of my life with Laura, and despite everything, it still left a mark. You don't just walk away from that kind of betrayal without scars. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in that place forever. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to resentment, anger, the need for revenge. And now, with it all behind me, it was time to let go. Time to start living for myself again. I started going out more, meeting new people, making connections that weren't tied to my past. At first, it felt strange, like I was relearning how to be myself. But gradually, I started to find my footing again. New friends, new experiences. I even started dating, though I took things slow. No more drama. No more betrayal. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I was finally enjoying my life without the weight of my marriage dragging me down. The final conversation I had with Laura was through our lawyers. There wasn't much left to say. She didn't even look at me during the last court session, and I was fine with that. What could she say anyway? There was no apology that could fix what she did. No words that could undo the damage. It was better this way, clean, final, with no lingering doubts. But as I walked out of that courtroom, I realized something. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel anything really. She was just someone I used to know. Someone who hurt me deeply, sure, but someone who no longer had any power over me. And that was the real victory. The last time I saw Tim was at our parents' house. They had invited me over to talk about the business, wanting to patch things up after everything that had happened. Tim wasn't there. Apparently, they'd cut him off completely, and honestly, I couldn't care less. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. We were done. Walking away from my family's drama, from Laura, from everything, it felt like shedding an old skin. The revenge, the anger, it had all served its purpose. But now it was time for something new, something better. And so, I left that chapter of my life behind. I didn't need to look back. I had everything I needed in front of me, freedom, control, and a future that was finally mine to shape. As I walked down the street, away from my old life, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air felt clearer, the path ahead wide open. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about starting over. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready.